There's people who had family relationship breakups. There's people who were vulnerable, who suffered from mental illness and engaged in self-harm and worse. All along, the government hasn't actually said who was responsible for it. It took a Victorian Legal Aid Commission, a court case with a very brave individual person, to go all the way to the federal court. And on the day that court case was meant to start, the government finally turned up and said, yes, this scheme's unlawful. It's taken a class action with tens of thousands of ordinary citizens taking their government to court to force a refund of $720 million. But the big question is, who was responsible? The Administrative Appeals Tribunal, a watchdog for the government, a watchdog for citizens, said over 1,000 days ago, this scheme is unlawful. The Morrison government gamed the AAT. They ignored the decisions. We need a Royal Commission because our system is broken and the government broke it. They won't answer questions in Parliament. We gave the government till last Friday to stop hiding behind arguments of legal privilege, come clean and tell us who knew what when, why did this happen and how do we stop it again. We asked them to reveal their arguments. The government had closed the business last Friday, said no way. This is a Royal Commission that the Morrison government is bringing on itself, and their ministers should be held to account. We're happy to take questions.
Thanks, Bill. Questions?
The Greens put a motion up last week for a Royal Commission that Labor voted against. Why is that, if that's what you're after?
Because we wrote to the government and we wanted to give them every opportunity to stop hiding behind legal arguments. We gave them a deadline of last Friday to respond. They've refused to do so.
The Coalition's previous calls for Royal Commissions, pink bats and the trade unions. Why is this different?
This has an enormous impact on hundreds of thousands of Australians. We want families and individuals to be able to tell their stories. We want a full exposure of these issues. On the issues that you raised, there were multiple coronial inquiries, of course, and other inquiries into those issues. But people participated in those inquiries. And I think today's probably not the day to raise the Trade Union Royal Commission as an example of government best practice.
Mr Albanese, can I ask you in relation to the government's JobKeeper program, would Labor
can we just stick on this for a tick, and if there are other questions, happy to take them.
You mentioned there were coroner's reports and other inquiries into pink bats, for example. There's a court case into robodebt. There's been a Senate inquiry into robodebt. You could lodge Freedom of Information requests to find information about robodebt. What exactly do you think can't be uncovered through any of those processes?
Well, we have. I'll ask Bill to respond to this as well. But you've witnessed Parliament. We've asked questions, and what we get is stonewalling from this failed Minister Stuart Robert. We haven't got answers. People are asking for answers. This had an incredible impact on people. If you go back and look at footage, I stood up with a young man in my electorate who was in his 20s, who had cancer. So he used up all his sick leave. He then had to go on Centrelink benefits because he had no income to pay his rent, to buy food. At the time he was going through chemotherapy, a young man in his 20s, he was being pursued by the government for a debt that he just didn't owe. That added to the traumatic impact on his health. And that's just one story. There are thousands of stories just like that.
The reason why a Royal Commission is necessary is, first of all, the class actions about establishing a right to compensation. So that'll deal with that matter. But it doesn't deal with how did we get into the set of circumstances where a democratically elected government is unlawfully sending debt notices out to hundreds of thousands of Australians. So that court action can't get to all of those issues. Secondly, we've tried the Parliament. But you see the government. I mean, I don't know if it's a cunning strategy to put one of your least performing, low expectation ministers into the portfolio and hopefully dumb the issue down so we'll just give up. But Parliament's broken. It's not fixing this issue. Thirdly, we need to protect the whistleblowers. I've already had people contact me this morning when the first news of a Royal Commission started to filter out, saying that if there's a Royal Commission, they want to give evidence. We've got to protect our public servants. And finally, I think the key reason why a Royal Commission and only a Royal Commission will do the job is because this government, whenever it feels the blowtorch, it goes into denial, then it goes into bargaining, and then what it says is, oh, we've got legal immunity, legal privilege. Well, that, you know, I just don't believe that that government is serious about legal immunity. What they want is they don't want to have their logic uncovered. The protection that Australian citizens have in social security law is that if the government does something wrong, you can go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. There were hundreds of cases filed. There were decisions in black and white. The third paragraph of the first decision by AAT member Carney just spelled out, this is unlawful. We have to ask ourselves, and this government will never tell us the truth, what did the government do when it was put on notice by the watchdog there was a problem with its system? And I tell you, I think they put their own economic self-interest ahead of the law. I think they had a legal strategy to settle up the noisy complainants and hope they could still keep, you know, getting the money in the back door for all the people who just gave up. So this government needs to explain what it knew and when it knew. I mean, they remind me a little bit of the legal strategies deployed by James Hardie, different fact circumstances, but James Hardie used to say, oh, we've got immunity, we've got immunity. The louder Mr Morrison squeals about legal privilege, the more I know there's something being covered up here.
When the Prime Minister's asked about this, and he was again this morning, he always says that it's based on a system of income averaging that was pioneered by Labor, as if to infer that it was all your idea.
Well, that's typical of Scott Morrison. This is a guy who wants to run the country but doesn't want to take responsibility for anything at all. The fact is that robodebt, the problem here is that they took humans out of human services. They didn't actually have anyone in charge, and that's one of the things that the Royal Commission would look at, about the impact of the contracting out and the use of basically robots, that's why it's called robodebt, robots, to automatically generate debts and letters in spite of looking at the human element here. And that's the big difference. For Scott Morrison, this crisis did not arise under the former Labor government. It came under his watch and he proudly announced it with a media release.
The people who have been party members for hardly any time.
Can we just deal with this for the moment?
Could the case of the robodebt be originated by the Department of Social Services? I mean, they would have architected, designed the program and put it to the government?
Well, that's why we're having a Royal Commission. That's why we want to get to the heart of whose idea was this, what mechanisms were gone through to make these decisions, what departmental oversight was in place. That's why you have an inquiry, so that we get those details. We don't have them now, and the government won't provide them.
Is it fair that people who have only just signed up to be members of the Labor Party...
I'm happy to... Is there any more on robodebt? Okay,
should they be able to vote in a decision as momentous as the leader of the party?
There isn't a decision at the moment over the leader of the party.
The way the rules are structured mean that people who have only just joined the party, rather than people who've been members for a longer period of time and shown a true commitment to the party, can vote when there is a vote for the leadership.
The rules of the Labor Party have been established. They're established at national conference. They're established to give members a vote.
Party leadership, Mr Albanese, if you lose the by-election in Eden Monaro, do you have any concerns that there are people who would like the top job, maybe Mr Shorten over there?
Not at all. The fact is, I was elected unopposed as leader of the Labor Party. We intend to put our best foot forward in Eden Monaro. We're doing that. We have the best candidate, and we await the determination of the voters.
Mr. Albanese, the government's JobKeeper program, which is due to expire at the end of September.
Sorry, which one?
JobKeeper program. Would Labor support industry-specific measures and industry-specific support, or would you prefer to see JobKeeper as a blanket program extended for all?
Well, the first point to make is that there are whole sections of industry that are missing out right now, whether it be the arts and entertainment sector. Probably the the camera people working today, there were people at this press conference who are probably missing out on JobKeeper due to the nature of their employment. There's Donata workers who are missing out because of a change in ownership structure of that company that used to be called Qantas Catering. There are 1 million casuals who are missing out. What we say is that the government simply shouldn't put in place a system whereby there's such an economic shock from the withdrawal in a brutal way of JobKeeper on one day.